I would spend the entire summer almost alone. I'll come back every 4 days, get more food, tell everybody I was okay, and it'd disappear again. And it was just so exciting, and it just went from there.
This is Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, and I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Scratch the surface of an explorer, and you'll find an adventure and a great story. This show is about their tales. This podcast is a proud supporter of the Explorers Club and the EC50 Initiative, 50 people changing the world that the world needs to know about. For more information, go to explorers.org. Our guest today is the author of a fabulous book called Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker, which is an account of solo backpacking for over a half a century in some of the most rugged and remote places on Earth. Welcome to Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, J.R. Harris. Hi, J.R.
Hey, how you doing, Richard?
Hey, when I say in the introduction part that you've been solo hiking for over a half a century, doesn't when you throw something century, you go, really? Is that me?
Yeah, it doesn't really sound realistic like it was something here. But you know what? Sometimes I remember some of those tough days out there, and it seems like 2 centuries.
To just give people an idea, right now you're sitting in your hometown. You grew up in Queens, New York. 1963 World's Fair was there. The Mets play there. I think Paul Simon is from there. You know, a lot of people are from the borough of Queens. So growing up in Queens, it wouldn't seem to me that that would be the likely entry point into a lifetime of solo wilderness hiking.
Well, nothing gets by you, does it, Richard? I mean, yeah, the folks I grew up with to this day think it's odd, it's strange. People in my family, they still think it's such an odd thing to do. But, you know, you never know. Queens is that kind of a borough, man. It must be the water that we're drinking out here or something. Man.
Yeah, the many qualities of Queens, water wouldn't be one of them, JR. So, you know, it's interesting. When I was a kid, there was something in me, like if there was a really snowy day, like blowing wind, I loved to go out there. And for that brief moment, I dreamt I was in the Arctic, you know, that I was somewhere out on the tundra. And I couldn't wait to see what was beyond where I lived. And so when I talk to a lot of explorers, that's something similar. What do you remember that sort of pivotal point or those moments as a kid?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it was exactly like you described. I always wanted to be a mountain man. You know, I studied, Lewis and Clark expedition and Jim Bridger and, all of the trappers and traders and pioneers, Davy Crockett. This image of, a guy dressed in buckskin and he's got his pack horse there, pack train, and he's got his little mangy dog and a musket. They're disappearing into the mountains, to trap and hunt and coming back, alone, a year later, to trade his pelts for supply. Yeah, I said, geez, I born 100 years too late. But, as it turned out, it wasn't too late after all. There was a big world out there for me to check out. And I learned how to do it from the Boy Scouts and went right from there. But yeah, it was unusual for New York City.
Was there any one person or one event that you think kicked it off?
When I was about 16, I went to a movie. A movie came out called Alexander the Great. Starred, I don't remember his name.
Richard Burton?
Richard Burton. And it was Technicolor. It's a real new thing, So I go to the movie, and in this movie, young Alexander is like 16 years old, about the same age I was at the time. And he's talking to Socrates, his teacher. Socrates says, hey, listen, what would you rather have? A short, exciting life or a long, dull life? And so, of course, Alexander says a short, exciting life. He goes on to capture most of the known world before he dies at 33. So now I'm walking home from the movie and I'm saying, wow, what an intriguing question. I'm the same age. What would I pick? And I said, yeah, I would pick a short, exciting life anytime. And it seems like almost from that moment, my life got to be really very exciting. But then when I finally turned 33,
Wait. There's a lot of distance between 16 and 33. So JR, you're 16, you get home, you realize that your father was not the king and you were not going to inherit the largest known empire. What's the scheming in a young JR Harris's mind?
So I knew I was from a whole different world than Alexander the Great, but an exciting life, the way I would describe it in my lifetime, not back in the Middle Ages or antiquity. There's still a lot of excitement to have. And then my folks decided to put me in the Boy Scouts and send me away to the Catskills to the summer camp in the mountains. I'd never been in the mountains. I'd never been anywhere near mountains. I had no idea what it was like. I tell people, the first time I ever saw grass, I tried to smoke it. I just had no clue. I learned how to read a map and use a compass and build a fire in the pouring down rain and track animals and all this stuff. And it was really exciting. And we were allowed at our camp, if you were proficient enough and you had camping, cooking, and pioneering merit badges, you could go off on your own for up to 4 days. You could take food out of the dispensary there and you could tell your people where you're going, and you can go and make a camp on your own in the woods for up to 4 days. And I would spend the entire summer almost alone. I'll come back every 4 days, get more food, tell everybody I was okay, and it'd disappear again. And it was just so exciting. And it just went from there.
That's a remarkable story because, Queens is a fairly densely populated place, and you can't really go virtually anywhere and not be within like 100 yards of somebody. So the first time that you are alone, what was that feeling for you?
It was surreal. I didn't really realize how used to the noise I was, how used to the traffic I was. I couldn't get wrapped around, how there were no people out there, how I could see broad expanses of the sky and not be blocked out by skyscrapers. It was like being on another planet in a way. It was so different from what I was used to when I grew up in. And at first I was intimidated, just by being there. But gradually, and not even really that gradually, I really started picking up on stuff about how to live out there and be comfortable out there. And it just opened up a whole other side of my personality. My perspective changed. And I really, even though I knew that all those skills I was learning, I wouldn't be able to use them when I got back home, the confidence that it gave me. And I was a different person. When I came back from 10 Mile River Scout Camp at the end of the summer that first year, I was a different kid. And I went back another 4 or 5 years to that camp. Couldn't wait until June to get back up there. And that's really what started it. Just being out there in the mountains. I also learned about respecting the wilderness and the environment. It was just, for a young city kid like me, it was a whole different lifestyle. It was a whole different experience. Very, very exciting, just like I envisioned it after the movie.
Our mission is to empower the next generation of explorers. If you like this podcast, please recommend it to a friend and have them join the expedition. It's funny because I think that when you describe that to people, there's a very romantic notion of it. And there will be people, and I'm going to use New York City as an example because I lived there for a lot of years. Some people, you tell that story and they really, there's envy. They're like, wow, I wish I could do that. That sounds great. And then there's other people going to go, why are you going to do that? It's cold, it's damp, it's, all those other things that they're just like, why would you possibly do that? So when you say that you changed, I mean, what did your parents say about this? What did your siblings or what did you?
I had a lot of friends. We grew up in the projects and there were 1,000 kids, and we all, grew up together and was really great. When I started to disappear for the summer because I went up to camp, of course, I didn't see them, but I would come back and they would say, dude, why do you do that? Why would you want to sleep on the ground? Why would you want to sleep in a tent? Why would you want to carry a pack? And there was no way I could explain it. My family thought it was fine. My parents, who were like the greatest two people that ever lived, totally got it. They understood who I was. They knew I was very independent. They knew I liked to be out on my own and I liked to discover things. So they encouraged it. And really the rest of the people, they came around to, listen, I would never do it, they said. But I'm glad you do it because somebody needs to do it and come back and tell us, what it's like out there.
So as a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old boy from New York City, when you're out in the wilderness, you're running into other people who are kind of like that. How is that experience from going to a lot of people to probably seeing other one or two groups? I mean, what was your perception or how were they perceiving you?
To be honest, where I would go, I would hardly see anybody. I did walk on the Appalachian Trail or places that have a lot of hikers, but my preference was to pack a backpack and go off where I would purposely not see anybody. I wanted to be isolated. I wanted to be alone. I wanted to be a mountain man. I wanted to be that guy who was by himself the whole year, had to depend only on his wits and his courage and his knowledge. So the few people that I saw were kind of like me, and I never had a problem with people out there.
JR, what was it you think? I mean, you've had to reflect upon this because having the conscious choice of doing this solo versus sharing the experience, you've made that conscious choice. So what is it, do you think, about your personality that wanted you to do it by yourself versus going with a buddy or somebody you wanted to share it with?
First thing I have to say is that I have gone out with friends, not very often and not very many friends. I never went out with more than 3 people at a time, and usually only one other person. I say that to say that every single trip I ever took with a friend or a couple of friends has been great. We had a really good time. I really enjoyed it. What it comes down to is there were things that I wanted to see. There were experiences that I wanted to have. There were places I wanted to go. And nobody I knew, shared that desire at the same level as me.
There is now deemed a bit of a crisis with kids in the outdoors. And where I live, there are plenty of outdoors, so a kid can't help but see the outdoors by just getting in the car or walking out on the lawn or all that other stuff. So project this to New York City. There's still a bit of a crisis of getting people out into the wilderness. How does one accomplish that? Why do people from New York City, you feel, not necessarily, or from the projects, not necessarily have that vision of being in the wilderness?
Well, I think it's mostly because none of us, and I put myself in that category when I was really young, none of us knew anybody who did it. We never had any stories about people who went out there and came back and said, hey, here's what it's like. You go on a nice camping trip, you cook out, you sleep in a tent. It was just so different. And without that knowledge, that reinforcement from people who've been out there was no way anybody wanted to go. We didn't know what it was like. And now it's pretty much the same. There are more people going out. And I think people are starting to realize what all the benefits are of being outdoors. And so it's a little easier to convince people to go out and take a hike or a walk or a ski or whatever. And I know that in my business, I have clients who are government agencies like the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service. And I consult with them on how to get people, especially urban people, to get outdoors.
Yeah, just for the audience who's not seeing you, you would classify yourself as African American. And when you say urban people, we're talking about Latino, we're talking about African American. You're talking about kids who wouldn't necessarily have a role model, another African American that they see, or another Latino that they recognize as an outdoorsman. And so when you used to walk out into the wilderness, I have to imagine in the 70s that a young African American kid coming down the trail is a little bit of an anomaly himself.
Yeah, you could go back even to the 1960s.
All right, let's go back to the 60s. Summer of Love. Go ahead, JR. Where are you?
Yeah, I would walk down and, I would see another group of hikers. And they would look at me like I was some alien that just got off a spaceship, and be so surprised as to actually say to me, wow, I never saw a Black person out here. That's incredible. And I would say to them, I never saw one either. So it's really incredible.
So, did you ever run into it? I mean, you had to have run into other people of color on the trail at some point.
Not until maybe over the last year or two, that I've been going out. And recently I was in Denali, the Wind River in Wyoming, places where there are a lot of people out there. Over the last few years, you would see more people of color, not only backpacking, but I like to ski summer and winter. You still don't see many, but you see a lot more now. But yeah, back in the day, forget it. You didn't see anybody.
In America right now, and even in the world, it seems like people have gotten more tribal, that they really are putting themselves as a group and planting sort of flags. What is the positive aspect of and I'm going to go now to science and the outdoors. What is the benefit to society or humankind from having a diverse world?
Well, here I'm no expert, but I have been traveling around for many, many years. And one thing that I've learned is that at the end of the day, we're more similar than we are different. I've been around the world 13 times. Everybody that I've met, wherever I've been, people want the same thing. They want to raise their kids. They want to get them educated. They want them to be healthy. They want the next generation to be a little bit better than they were. So even though people wear different clothes and speak different languages, if you take the time to learn and interact with people, the differences seem to kind of fade away after a while. And you realize that there's a lot of common ground. That's what I was picking up as a kid growing up. And that's what I've learned, as an adult since then.
Is that one of the reasons that you, despite wanting to be a mountain man, have ultimately chosen to live in Queens?
Well, I live in Queens because it's a nice place. What I like about Queens more than anything else is that it's so diverse. And, I raised 2 kids myself, and they were raised like me. They didn't really make a big deal about the differences in the friends and the kids they went to school with and the kids that lived next door. Everybody hung out together. They usually hung out here in my place right here. All the kids after school would come here. They'd be doing their homework. And so it was something that I was used to. And so it was easy for me to be around people who were different from me. And it was easy for me to be friends with people who were different from me.
I think that is one of your hallmarks, though, JR, is curiosity. A mutual friend of ours, we spoke on this subject, and she said if you approach a situation with sincerity, it will generally be met with sincerity as well. And so that was good advice in sort of going into situations that maybe you don't know what the right gestures or way to sit down at a table. If you meet them with sincerity, generally people will in kind reply with sincerity.
I absolutely and totally agree with that. And all my experience over all these years, my folks, when I was growing up, said, treat other people the way you would like them to treat you, and you're going to be fine. And it's been true. It's absolutely true. All of the places, whether I met people in the desert or the jungle or the Arctic or wherever, you treat them with respect and you treat them with kindness the way you want them to treat you. And I found that they treat me exactly the same way. And so that's why I'm optimistic, and that's why I believe that people are curious about other people, but they have to overcome a certain reluctance before they'll actually take that step. But once they do, then it's great. Then there's no turning back, and they're going to be good.
It's really good advice. It's simple advice, and it's been said probably 1,000 different ways, but it's great advice. JR, thank you for being on Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for the invite. Always a pleasure talking to you. And if anybody hears this and they want a nice book,
it's way out there.
Thanks a lot.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Now we have a little favor to ask. We'd really appreciate your support, so make sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. See you out on the trail.